Hey guys, welcome to Spirit Pig. This is the show that explores how to live a fulfilled life. I'm Duncan CJ, and today I'm speaking with Dacher Keltner. Dacher is a professor of psychology at the University of California, Berkeley, the founding director of the Greater Good Science Center, and editor of its magazine, Greater Good. He's the author of the books The Power Paradox, How We Gain and Lose Influence, and Born to be Good. After his Ph.D. from Stanford in 1989, Dacher has been devoted to the study of emotions like embarrassment, compassion, and awe that make us fully human, as well as evolutionary approaches to social hierarchies and power. So we are going to jump into many of those things today. But yeah, first of all, hello, and thank you for being here. I really appreciate it.
It's great to be with you, Duncan.
I actually the second I started, I was like, I heard on a couple of interviews where I was watching some other stuff, and the person pronounced it Dacher, and I was like, did I actually get that right?
You did.
A few, because I suddenly realised I said it 3 times in the intro, so if it was wrong, then I was really hammering home, just like doing it wrong 3 times in a row, so that's good.
Good.
Now, 8 or 9 years ago, when you did the book Born to be Good, one thing that sort of became acutely aware was actually how good human beings are. And that's obviously, especially in light with like everything that's going on at the moment, you turn on the news, the politics, that's quite a reassuring thing. This is what actually your research told you, that actually human beings are essentially good.
Yeah, and it is a very timely thing to remember today, right? With everything that's going on, that, there's in the past 30 years or so, there's been this big shift in evolutionary thinking where we've realized that we're a very caring species. We care for these hyper-vulnerable offspring. We're a very empathetic species compared to our primate relatives. We know what others feel and really imitate a lot. We are a very collaborative and cooperative species. We're able to work together on just about everything. And then for me, Duncan, as you said in the introduction, what all of those shifts translate to is that we have these amazing, what Adam Smith called moral sentiments, things like compassion, gratitude, awe, wonder, that really help us build up strong societies. And what that tells us, for people who are really struggling today with Brexit in England and the rise of right-wing political movements in other parts of Europe and the United States, is we have these very powerful old tendencies that I think can countervail those more base sides to human nature.
And slight shift, but one thing I found fascinating through learning about some of your work was just, even though I've heard about it obviously lots and lots, but I'd love to chat for a little bit about oxytocin and just why is this such just a special chemical?
Well, I mean, so when you say that you're born to be good, like the title of my book, right, that's a strong claim because it says we have these innate tendencies to be kind or to share or what have you. And then what that further posits is that we should have physiological systems in our bodies and chemicals that help us be good to each other. And my labs really worked very assertively on that thesis. And one of the most amazing of the chemicals that help us be good to each other is this little neuropeptide called oxytocin. It's produced in your brainstem. It goes up into your brain, and then it also floats through your blood, right? And it goes to tissues and target organs in your body. And, oxytocin is involved when mothers give birth. It's involved in milk letdown. When moms see their little babies and it's so cute, and it's covered in the post-birth fluid and stuff, that's oxytocin tricking the mom into, being good to that thing. And just study time and time again shows it helps us connect to, cooperate with, share with other individuals who we feel are part of our tribe, right? There are a little controversial findings right now about whether it helps us connect to people who are really different from us, and the evidence is mixed there, but it really does open us up to be good to others.
And so this is obviously the fact that it survived for sort of millions and millions of years of evolution, and it's resulted in us having this. It's obviously is it fair to say that because of that, then obviously it's got a massive evolutionary benefit of, there's to having it, obviously.
Yeah, it does. So we know, it's really important for humans to cooperate, right? Be it in taking care in the evolutionary sense of our vulnerable offspring or, cooperating in food gathering or the like. And there are studies that show if I just take a little whiff of this oxytocin with a nasal spray, right? I share more with you. If I'm in a romantic partnership, I forgive you and I don't have them as much conflict with you. I mean, it's amazing. And we in our lab have traced levels of oxytocin back to particular genes, for example, on the sixth chromosome, that influences how much oxytocin you have circulating in your body. And those genes predict more empathy and openness to others. So this is one of the most direct pieces of evidence for the thesis we've evolved to be good.
I love that. I found that hilarious. This idea of this nasal spray with oxytocin, then you have it.
I know.
It made me
And
laugh.
it's funny, Duncan. When I was teaching this stuff, one of my undergrads pointed out that in England, of all places, they have fabricated sprays that you can spray oxytocin into the air. And
I'm gonna have to look that up. Now I know that something which is taken, obviously, like it's a huge passion and interest, particularly at the moment. This topic of awe, this idea of, I think your definition was of being in the presence of something vast beyond current understanding. Yeah. What spawned this interest in awe for you? What was the sort of seed that got you excited about that idea?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. So one of the delights in studying human emotion, like I have, is in a way I get to be like William James, who's an important figure in American psychology and the brother of Henry James, a great writer, and so forth. And James learned a lot about emotion through observing his own experience, right? As any human being does. And I have really drawn my studies of human emotion that I write about in Born to Be Good and the Power Paradox from my own experiences. Like I got interested in oxytocin when I had young kids, and I was like, God, you get so filled with love. What is the physiological process involved in that? And I would say, Duncan, I was raised in a kind of a wild family in the late 60s in Laurel Canyon, Hollywood, California, pretty wild. And it was a time filled with awe, and a lot of my early and most formative experiences in my life were about awe, like, hearing Martin Luther King or seeing political protests or going to art museums and being awestruck by the Dutch masters, or later in my life when I was a young man, like going to Iggy Pop and seeing Iggy Pop and just like being transformed. And the science, and I would come out of these experiences and I'm like, I feel like I should do good for the world. I should work harder. I should be a good person. I should cooperate with others. I feel transformed. And there was no scientific study of that. And so my lab's become obsessed with documenting how awe makes stronger social collectives.
I mean, and talking about that, some of what's been documented, I mean, there's now this research showing that awe actually moves us away from self-interest to actually moving towards sort of being really engaged and, interested in the interest and the passions of others. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, so, various scholars in evolutionary circles and a little bit in economics have said, in some sense, if we're this hypersocial species, right, and we do best evolutionarily and then psychologically when we collaborate with others, one of the central problems is you have to put aside your self-interest to do that work, right? If I'm going to be a good, colleague at work, I can't always be pursuing my own desires, right? I have to advance the interests of others. If I'm going to be a good family member or a member of my community, same thing. That people have called it the problem of collective engagement or what have you. And I think what we're starting to realize is that big parts of our brains and our psyches are really mechanisms that help us move away from self-interest and really value the interests of others. So awe is a classic example, right? We feel awe in collective situations, when we're dancing or we're at a political rally or we're out in nature with friends or we're in a contemplative practice. And our studies show, just brief experiences of awe, even something like watching planet Earth, right? You just are awestruck by nature. You share more with other people. You give more to charity. You empathize better, right? We've got a lot of new data showing that you become more humble. And so we think that this emotion of awe in particular sort of quiets the voice of self-interest and makes you better to other people.
Yeah, I'm just thinking when you're saying that, I mean, this isn't a question I've got already, but it's just like, if this is what the data is showing, like I'm just trying to work out what a sort of a culture of awe would look like. I'm trying to work out what kind of if we all kind of really internalize that idea and obviously decrease like in like narcissism and abuses of power. That's obviously like one of them. But
yeah.
Well,
I think I think that's one of the most interesting questions you can ask about this. And what you see is that cultures do various things, subcultures, to harness this powerful form of awe, these powerful effects of awe, right? So religion involves a certain amount of transcendent experience in temples and the like. So that's using this pro-social power of awe. Political movements, right? I remember when people talk about being around political leaders or hearing Martin Luther King, or when I personally saw Nelson Mandela when he'd gotten out of South African prison, and I was awestruck, and that solidified my commitment to that kind of cause. Even, when you think about more youthful alternative forms of cultures, right? Rave cultures and, Burning Man here in the United States, of like where you get together and you do these transcendent things. And again, they build the strength of the community through this interesting emotion.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess like, could it be used like, if it's got that powerful connecting of people, I mean, could that be used for good or for bad? Like, is in the wrong hands? Is that maybe you're talking about big, I'm just making stuff up as I go along, but like, no. I guess like in the wrong hands, like if it's got that power to connect people, right. the wrong person behind it or the right person behind it could do amazing things, but vice versa, could it do wrong?
Yeah, I think that, so one of the things, and that's a really important question today, when we're worried about the rise of right-wing political tendencies. We do know, we have a paper coming out that about a quarter of awe experiences do not have this kind of pro-social, collaborative quality to them that you and I have been talking about. A quarter of them are fear-based and hierarchical, where you really feel threatened, right? So you might imagine in Hitler's Germany, although historians don't feel Hitler was terribly awe-inspiring, or Stalin's Russia, they're like Stalin had this cult of personality, and I suspect people felt awe toward the whatever the grandfather, or whatever they call it. Yeah. But that form of awe was very likely fear-based. And really what we know is these fear-based forms of awe produce stress. They clamp down on creative thought. They make you more worried about risk, and you push people away. Almost the opposite of the other spectrum of awe. And we really should worry about that, right? It's interesting. I note, we're so immersed in political issues here in the United States right now. Surveys of the Trump supporters did not find they felt awe toward him. They just were like, we just want something to change, So I'm not as worried about that here, but it's a really important question.
Yeah, and I know that Goosebumps. That's something where talking about that in terms of, I guess, one way to work out work out whether something's maybe positive or negative is just the age-old kind of thing of just listening to your body, maybe, listening to your body and actually feeling like, how does it feel? And Goosebumps is an interesting topic. What have you been? I know you've got in your lab, I think you've got one of the world authorities on Goosebumps. That's just a great title in itself. So I wanted to say it.
Yeah. Yeah, but one of my students is indeed the world authority on Goosebumps, which, she is devoting her to it. But, this is why the Darwinian perspective is so interesting. Just as you say, Duncan, you start with a quirky physiological response, and suddenly it tells you everything you want to know about, social structures or moral tendencies or the like. So Laura Maruskin started with the observation that people feel goosebumps, right? They say like, oh, I was at this concert, and when this vocalist sang this great part of a song, I got goosebumps. Or I was at a political rally and I got goosebumps. Or, I walked by somebody I felt was really dangerous and I got goosebumps. And so what Laura did is a lot of work that really identified two different responses, right? And one is kind of the tingle you get that goes up the back of your neck, right? When you feel inspired. The other is this shudder, this cold shiver that you get when you feel repulsed, right? I don't know if you've ever had that, but you may have this, when I hear the bigotry of Donald Trump, I get this shudder, like, oh God, it's almost a fearful foreboding. So Laura pulled those two responses apart, and it turns out most mammals have those responses. And one is where the shudder and the cold shiver feels really evil, if you will, like you're in the presence of evil and you feel alienated. And then the tingling response is when you feel more awe, when you feel inspired and empowered. So it's really interesting for just like you say, to use those two bodily responses to tell you important things about your social world, what makes you feel awe and where you think potential sources of evil are, and the body will tell you.
What's exciting you right now? Where's your mind at? What are you thinking about? What are you planning next? I don't know. What's exciting you?
Well, I think it's really two things, and one is it really builds on your observation earlier, Duncan, which is that our lab has shown that if I feel awe, right, I go out and get some awe. I'm better to people. I share more. I'm more curious about the world. I'm more creative. My inflammation response in the body, which is one of the most important predictors of strong health, is healthy. And in light of those findings, we've started this thing called the Great Outdoors Lab that is partnering with different ecological groups. And the main goal is to get, there are certain parts of our society who are awe deprived, right, in the United States. Poor kids in urban areas do not see nature. And a lot of people have written about this, and we're starting to document the benefits of getting out in nature for poor kids. And then we're also looking at veterans in the United States. The United States has over 2 million veterans. They're very often really suffering, right, from coming back from Iraq or what have you. So we're giving them those opportunities, studying it scientifically. And I really hope that it seeps into healthcare, right? That a doctor, if you go and you say, God, I'm feeling anxious, or I'm feeling my body hurts, or I'm feeling, I have an inflammation process that's hyperactivated, the doctor should tell you, like, well, why don't you get outside for an hour a week? And we now know that really benefits people. So that's one. And then our lab is really interested in inequality. As you know, this has been a 30-year period of rising inequality. The United States leads the world in inequality, and we're showing it's bad for health and marriage and racism and just about everything you would wish good for, inequality is bad for. So we're really starting to work on that.
The belief that kind of got popularized with sort of Gordon Gekko, the belief that sort of greed is good. How, and I guess when you hear that, and I guess, it kind of almost becomes internalized and people genuinely believe that. How dangerous do you feel that belief has been on our societies?
Thank you for asking that, Duncan. Science is useful very often when it can lead to evidence that takes on basic ideas we have, right? And so, in the United States and in a lot of parts of the world, I suspect in parts of London and India, and, certainly when I, taught in Beijing and, elsewhere, in Dubai, there is this idea that we are designed as greed machines to maximize our self-interest, right? And, it's funny. I've been teaching the science of happiness, both at Berkeley and then on an online platform. And the data just disconfirm that notion. So, for the individual, if I pursue materialism and greed, I become less happy, right? And studies show that time and time again. It's more important to prioritize experiences or connections with people. B, we know if I pursue greed, I create social structures that are unequal. And we know that unequal social structures make people less happy, right? And then I would even push out and say, we have a serious climate change issue that is only the current presidential cabinet denies it in the world. And that comes out of this ethos of greed. And there are just very few data that say, this is the overarching motivation. And we know that healthy people balance, right? They balance self-interest with other interests, as we've been talking. And so I'm really worried about, and that Gordon Gekko statement drives me nuts. Thank you for bringing it up.
Well, to counter that, which is, we'll start with the greed is good, but then to counter that, I thought it was such a beautiful study, which you mentioned, I think it was in your commencement speech, about scientists gave resources to individuals in 15 remote cultures, from the Amazon to Indonesia. And those individuals, on average, gave away 40% of their resources just to strangers and just to share. Like, that's wonderful.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that finding up, Joe Henrich and his colleagues. There are studies now of Felix Wernicken at Harvard University showing, 18-month-olds will share stuff really intuitively. They'll help people who are in distress. It really seems like most people are inclined to share, except the people who have most of the money. So it's a sad irony of our 21st century.
But I mean, if that is sort of the more intuitive kind of thing, and then I guess the greed thing is what's reinforced by whatever, like the media, what we're told, then actually I'm not sure which way around would be healthier. Actually, probably the other way around. But I guess at least if that's our nature, then I think that it's hopeful that we can certainly return to a more sort of sharing, compassionate way.
Very much so, Duncan. And, another study is very telling on this, which is this work by David Rand at Yale, where he gave people the opportunity to share resources with a stranger. And if people made the decisions really fast and intuitively, they shared a lot. They shared over 50% of the resource. If you ask them to kind of think about what they should do, all of a sudden, Western culture kind of seeps into their mind, and they're like, what did I learn in that economics class? And what was that speech by Gordon Gekko? Oh, I should keep stuff for myself. And they shared less. And so I think that what that tells us is we have these deep intuitions. And then from my perspective, we need to refashion culture to make it more sharing, right? 1 in 5 people in the United States are in poverty. They're hungry. That shouldn't happen. And so we need to share more. And I take heart. I think that's what's happening with your generation. Younger folks in the United States are more interested in sharing. They're more oriented towards a better society. They're more skeptical, like you, of the Gordon Gekko thesis. My generation just said, "Oh yeah, no, greed is good," and there, I think we'll see shifts as your generation takes power.
Let's hope so. What does a fulfilled life mean to you?
Yeah, well, I think for me, the fulfilled life is acting on behalf of others and really sort of a service-oriented approach to living. And, I struggle with that all the time for a lot of different reasons. But what really strikes me, Duncan, is these emotions we've been talking about, compassion, oxytocin, awe. Probably you would add gratitude into the mix, right? Where you feel reverence for things that are given to you. A lot of theorists have said that these emotions, not only do they help you be good to others and build strong communities, but in many ways, they're the foundation of the meaningful life, right? That a lot of philosophers from Greek philosophy to East Asian thought, Martha Nussbaum more recently have said, if you want to find the meaningful life, go find out what makes you feel compassion, right? Find out what gives you awe. See where you feel gratitude, and then you're on your way. And I agree with that.
What is one thing our listeners can do today to have a big impact on their lives?
Well, I'll give you two. One is go find a source of awe and make that a regular part of your life. For me, it's just getting out and looking at trees or hills, or beautiful gardens in cities. And then the second is to just take a moment and just think about what you're grateful for, right? And that will start to sharpen your focus on the things in this complicated world that really will give you sustaining meaning.
Last but not least, how can people find out more about you and your work, and where can we send them?
Well, I think, the two books we've talked about, The Power Paradox and then Born to Be Good, but then just as importantly is the Greater Good Science Center. greatergood.berkeley.edu has 15 years of material that are on these themes we've talked about.
Dacher, thank you so much. It's been absolutely very illuminating, and I love it. I love researching all our guests, because every single time we just explore something, a brand new angle, a different way to look at things. And I mean, it's an absolute, it's a joy. So thank you for saying yes and for speaking with us today.
It's great being with you, Duncan. I hope it happens again.